On day 8 of the Global Chess League, there was this game, Yangyi against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, two top grandmasters rated over 2700. And why I'm excited to show you this game, it was a Scandinavian opening, starting with the moves e4, d5. It's my favorite opening, as I told you before on this channel. And I'm going to spam you with much more Scandinavian content, because just in a week or in a few days from now, my lifetime repertoire on this opening, on the Scandinavian, will be published on Chessable. And I would like to show you why this opening is such a great practical attempt for Black to try to play for a win from the get-go. And if it's played by a top player like Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, one thing is for sure, that there will be fireworks on the board. Let's have a look what happens in this game. After e takes d5, queen takes d5, knight c3, attacking the queen. The queen goes to a5. This is my favorite move. d4, knight f6. And now of all the possibilities, like for instance knight f3 or bishop d2, this is perfectly playable. But Yangyi goes for the second most popular move in the position, bishop c4, getting its king's bishop out. And now we play this move, bishop g4. Very nice, provocative move, attacking the queen. And we are going to see what is white going to do with that queen. f3 is one of the main moves, but it's of course a weakening pawn move, and the knight can no longer come to f3. Instead, Yangyi plays here the move knight ge2. Black goes for the move e6. So the bishop is happy to be outside the pawn chain. And basically black's position doesn't contain any weaknesses. But white can play very ambitiously now by playing the move f3. Questioning the bishop anyway. Bishop goes back to f5. And now white plays super aggressively the move g4. Attacking the bishop one more time. Bishop to g6. And there is this move h4. Intending to trap the bishop with the move h4, h5. As the bishop is not having sufficient squares to go to. And interestingly, and frankly, I think I'm not even allowed to tell you all the ins and outs of this position. But I'm gonna give you a very small preview on my repertoire, because in my repertoire I'm recommending here the move h5, putting pressure against the pawn on g4. But black is going to face this move knight f4 with tremendous pressure against the bishop. And well, things are getting really sharp. There's also pressure against pawn on h5. But here my recommendation is the move knight c6, ignoring the fact that white can just take on g6, ruining black's pawn structure. And in the meantime, black is considering to castle queenside and exert pressure in the center, counter-attacking the pawn on d4. This is why I'd love to recommend you this line. But unfortunately, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov didn't play the move h5. He played a very reasonable alternative, the move h6. It's a little bit more modest, I would say, with the idea that after now, knight f4, you can drop back with the bishop to h7, and you never have to be concerned of a pawn hanging on g5. And the bishop is safe on h7, but you got to be a little bit careful. White played the move bishop to d2, basically questioning what is the queen doing there on a5, and you have to be very careful. If you play a random move, white is probably gonna play knight d5, attacking the queen, and the queen also got to retain control over the c7 pawn, otherwise knight can take on c7. So you got to do something with the queen, and the main continuation here is to move the queen with gain of time. You can go with your queen to b4, attacking the bishop. If the bishop goes away and if the queen will later come under threat, it can always try to come back safe to e7. Has been a long journey, and that's very typical for the Scandinavian opening. You're wasting a few moves with your queen, but it's a very provocative opening as we hope to exploit white's weaknesses. Think about the pawn on d4 or the advanced pawns on the king side. We try to take advantage of it in the long run. Anyway, this didn't happen in the game. Mamedyarov played queen to b6, and it does attack both the pawns on b2 and d4. But frankly, you're not really interested in taking these pawns. White played here the move queen to e2. And I should say that objectively speaking, instead of queen e2, maybe the move d5 is even more precise, with the idea that if if black is going to take on d5 at some point, you would like to take with a knight on d5, end up with a knight on d5, opening the position, attacking the queen one more time. For instance, if you go here, we can give a check on e2 first, bishop e7, now we take on d5, and after knight takes, well, there are some problems for black regarding the queen. If you go queen d6, there's bishop f4, black's position is just falling apart now with tremendous pressure against the queen and the pawn on c7. Therefore, after d5, the key move is to play here e5. Keep the position closed, attacking the knight. White can play queen e2. And, well, there is knight d7. And this is an interesting position. Objectively, I think white is still a bit better. You cannot take the knight because of the pin, of course. Both sides are likely going to castle queenside. It's an interesting battle going on. But it didn't happen, as I said, and queen e2 was played in the game. Now, if you take on b2, you always got to reckon with rook b1 ideas. I don't think black's position is ready to get opened, and instead a more thematical response here is knight c6 with the idea to attack the pawn on d4. If white's going to play d5 now, you jump in with a knight to d4, attacking the queen. If the queen goes away, you have knight takes c2 with a fantastic knight fork. You're going to win material. So that is a serious threat. And by the way, what I should point out is that in the basically with the setup white has opted for, with the queen on e2, bishop on c4, knight on f4, white is intending, at least considering, to sacrifice material on e6. But here, if you take, you get 2 pawns for the piece, but black's position is relatively safe, and black can probably move the knight away very soon, initiating the exchange of queens or forcing the exchange of more material. That will help, of course, the side with extra material. So therefore, white has to watch out. The pawn on d4 is in trouble. Bishop b5 played to pin the knight on c6. Now, the pawn on d4 can be taken, but for just 1 pawn, white obtains a fantastic initiative. Thanks to the open d-file, the queen will get under threat. Rook h e1. All white's pieces are looking towards the black king. This is something you should generally avoid in the Scandinavian. Let's take it back. After bishop b5, a much wiser decision by black here is to castle queenside. Was played in the game. Now, knight takes d4 is a threat because the king is no longer on e8. It's safe on c8. And if you do take on c6 with your bishop to eliminate that attacker, you do recapture with the queen. And trading off 1 minor piece already is such a relief for black. Pawn on d4 is under threat. We are ready to complete our development. And if you're a fan of the channel, you may have seen my other video on the Scandinavian already. A game in which a strong grandmaster lost to someone almost 1,000 point lower rated. And in that game there was also a queen on c6, pinning the pawn on f3. So knight takes g4, trying to capture that pawn, exploiting the unprotected rook on h1 is a very typical idea. Now black has gained control over the light squares. Typical idea, but it didn't happen, as white played the move knight a4, attacking the queen on b6. Now queen takes d4 can be played. White is a pawn down, and if you would castle now, the black queen will quickly come back to d6, for instance, with the plan of placing the knight on d5 to close the d-file, take away all the threats against the queen, and then in the end, well, white's strategy backfire. Black is a full pawn up. Bishop takes c6 on the board, and now interesting moment, because b takes c6 would be a very logical recapture, but it's a weakening move. There can follow queen a6 check, and after king to b8, well, you cannot take the pawn on c6 yet because the queen will take on d2 thanks to the rook on d8. But after castling queenside, it's still shaky position. Anything can happen. But Mamedyarov, instead of recapturing, fought for a couple of minutes and then decided that a much better continuation here is the move bishop takes c2. It's a piece sacrifice for the moment, but you're attacking the knight on a4, and that is very important. Now, an important idea also is that if the bishop goes away, you just take on a4. The queen and bishop are both attacking that knight. In case of bishop e3 attacking the queen and the bishop on c2, there will follow queen b4, and black is quite okay in fact. If you go knight c3, don't take the bishop on c6 because the bishop on c2 can be taken and white is a piece up. But instead, the key move, and that's probably what Mamedyarov had calculated, is very aggressive move, e5. Fantastic idea to kick the knight out. If the knight would go away, then it's time to save our bishop first with bishop d3, attacking the queen. If the queen goes away, then we are finally able to capture the bishop on c6. A lot of tactical lines made possible thanks to the active placement of black's forces. This is so typical for the Scandinavian opening. Didn't happen in the game. There were a lot of other lines to consider, but let's see what happened in the game. As Yangyi thought to be clever here by taking on b7 with the bishop with check. What is the idea? I think after taking with the king, there is queen b5 check. And now if the king goes away, at least white is able to give a number of checks. And I think that's not what black had in mind, because it's a team competition and Mamedyarov's team had to play for a win. That's why he chose the Scandinavian opening, to put maximum pressure from the start. And instead of allowing that queen b5 check, he played here a fantastic move, ignoring the bishop, king b8. Now white is still a piece up, but pieces are hanging. And on the next move, black is going to regain one piece. Knight went back to c3, and only now the king decided to take on b7. With the point that a queen check on b5 can now be met by the move queen b6, which was not possible when the white knight was on a4 covering the b6 square. This time it's very clear that black is just a pawn up, consolidating its position, it's technically winning. Bishop e3 was played instead of queen b5, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop. The queen got to go away, but if you go to b4, then the bishop will be taken. So be careful. Queen e5 is the key move, so that after queen takes c2, now you take the bishop with check. Queen e5, only move, but very precise, very nicely found by Mamedyarov. Now, white is a pawn down, got to prove something, played rook c1, attacking the bishop. Bishop doesn't have many squares to go to, but it can still safely come back to h7. And here the critical moment of the game. This is going to be very interesting. Black is a pawn up, but his king is relatively open. White can play knight b5 with ideas to take on c7. Now, there is the move bishop b4 check. Definitely this was black's idea. The king will go away, and now after bishop a5, the bishop protects the pawn, can always come to b6 whenever it's needed. It's still a tricky position, but black is in good shape for sure. Instead, Yangyi wanted to improve upon his own idea by starting with the move king to f2, getting out of a potential check on b4 after moving the knight. But now, this is a brilliant move played by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. So important to find this idea, because this knight on f4, it's one of white's best pieces, controlling the d3 square. If you can kick it away with the move g5, the knight, let's say if it goes to g2, then you play the move bishop to d3. The bishop is anchored in the middle of the board, receiving the support from the rook, and black is about to consolidate its position with excellent prospects in the upcoming phase of the game. So instead, there followed h takes g5, very logical capture, but after h takes g5, the knight still got to move, you would think, but where is it going? That's not exactly clear. There are not too many good squares to go to. If it goes to g2, once again, there's bishop d3, and therefore, instead, Yangyi went all out here with an insane piece sacrifice. He played here the move knight b5, so that black can capture on f4, capturing a full piece. Now there is rook takes c7. This looks very dangerous because the king is not having that many defenders. The knight is supporting the rook, of course. If you go king to b8, there is bishop takes a7 with check. After the king goes away, you take the queen on e5 and it's game over. White is going to win. you don't want to go back into the corner because you think that allows something like rook takes a7 with check. Apparently black is also winning there, but much more efficient idea by black here is to give up the queen with queen takes c7. Fantastic shot. Knight takes c7, and now bishop to d3. It's there. Bishop attacks the queen, rook protects bishop. If queen goes away, we first take with a pawn on e3 with check attacking the queen. If you take the pawn, then it's rook takes h1, and black is having 2 rooks and 2 minor pieces against the queen. That is way too much. So what do we learn from this specific line? Well, is that very interestingly, if we go back 2 moves, the moment where h takes g5, h takes g5 was played, it looks as if there is this pin along the h-file and the bishop is unable to move. But if it is able to move with an attack on the queen, as like what happened in the game after knight b5, take, rook takes c7, queen takes, knight takes c7, bishop d3, then it's actually black who is taking advantage of that open h-file. The queen cannot go anywhere because the rook is hanging. You can take with check on e3. Also the knight on c7 is still hanging. Therefore Yangyi, with the flag was almost falling at this point, decided to take on h8. But after bishop takes e2, king takes e2, it's time to take the bishop on e3. Let's do the material count and we see that black is actually a full piece up. It's game over. White resigned. Mamedyarov striking with the Scandinavian opening, crushing victory in only 26 moves. That is the best possible advertisement I could ask for just a couple of days before the release of my lifetime repertoire on the Scandinavian. I hope you really enjoyed this video. Make sure to come back to the channel to see more videos on this specific opening, the Scandinavian, and of course a lot of other content will be discussed as well. Thanks for tuning in, subscribe to the channel, and we see each other very soon again. Bye bye.